Hey everybody, welcome back to Cop World Series. I'm your host, Pete Theron. I'm also the author of End of Tour. I was a New York City housing police officer back in the late 80s and 90s. And I did most of my time as a cop in uptown Manhattan, in Harlem and Washington Heights. In the 60s and 70s, the boroughs had their own gangs. And they were pretty much, they just defended their turf. They did some crimes, but they rarely were dealing drugs. But in the late 60s, Harlem had become home to heroin. As the years went on, these gangs started to break off and hip-hop came into existence right around when I was a police officer. And we had what was called hip-hop drug crews. These gangs became drug crews. In Harlem, one particular project was a total war zone. It was the Wagner projects. And Wagner is on First Avenue and Second Avenue from 120th to 125th Street. Along Second Avenue from 125th all the way to well into like 115, there were at that time in the late 80s and early 90s anywhere between 20 to 22 crews working the corners, selling crack and heroin. The crack crews, they individually wrapped each vial with their own trademark, their own color. That way the buyer, if they liked the product that they bought, would go back to them. You had yellow top, green, blue, black, red. But inside the project, there was one gang in particular. The boss of that gang's name was Bob. He actually was from the Bronx. And he stationed his operation inside Wagner Projects. He took that project over. And he had the stronghold of all the housing projects in that area of Wagner. There were little factions that he would let deal in there. That was they had to get his okay to do it. The name of his crew was the Obsession Crew, and they were dealing pink top. But the main group or gang or really an organization, it really was an organization that had Harlem in total fear and created mass mayhem. Conducted their business on 122nd Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue. That street was known as Purple City. The Purple Top Gang was by far the most violent gang at that time in Harlem. They were dealing anywhere from 250 bundles to 400 bundles a day. Each bundle consisted of between 50 to 100 vials. The gang leader, who was Casey, came up with the ingenious idea to sell the vials at a cheaper price. Instead of $5 and $10, he bought smaller vials and he sold them for $3, which quadrupled the sales that they were making. He put a better product in the vial. He packed it tighter. So all of the addicts that were going to all these other organizations to buy their crack started to go to 122nd Street because of word of mouth. The gang was so violent and so controlled that they operated out of the Triangle Towers, which is on the left side of the street. It's two tall buildings, and they took both of those buildings over. All the members pretty much lived in that residential area. And on the other side, there were several buildings, a bodega, and the gang, they pretty much took most of the tenements over. Most of their, if they wanted an apartment, they either drove that person out of that apartment or bribed the person and paid them to let them use the apartment as a stash house. They also had soldiers on leashes on a black iron gate. At any time of the day and night, you would see anywhere between 4 to 6 pit bulls chained to the iron gate, standing guard and watching over their stashes of the money, the drugs, and their weapons, and also keeping the crew safe while they were conducting business. The dogs looked like hellhounds. The pit bulls, their ears were cut, their tails were cut, and they were muscular. Each one weighed anywhere between 100 to 120 pounds. And they were vicious. They were trained to kill. They had thick spike chains on their necks or spike collars. And on any command, that a dog would be untied and let loose on a rival gang that would try to make the mistake of ripping them off, which never really happened because they were feared. I ended up setting my sights on this gang probably in 1990 or 89, and in a 2-year span, by conducting investigations from the rooftops of Wagner, I was able to arrest about 25 members of that gang. What also separated this gang was on the avenue, the other drug gangs, they were separated by the color of vial that they were selling, but they were also divided by their ethnic groups. They were either Spanish or black stealing. Purple Tops, they combined forces with the Spanish and the blacks, making the crew bigger. Their organization had at all times anywhere between 30 to 40 members. If somebody got arrested, a new person would be in. They were expendable. They knew going into when they got into the gang, you were either, chances you're going to make a lot of money, or you're going to be arrested, or you're going to be killed. But these kids made these choices. While I used to do the recon on these buildings, I would literally see what's called a cheese line on the sidewalk, waiting to be served. It was anywhere between 20 to 30 addicts that were waiting to get the product from the dealer. If the addicts got out of control or unruly while waiting online, they were dealt with with force. And I'm not talking about a slap in the face or a punch. The enforcers of the Purple Top crew beat them with baseball bats, breaking their ribs, bloodying their faces, whatever they had to do to keep control of the sales. And so the addict would know, okay, if I'm going to buy from there, I got to keep my shit together, or I'm gonna be beat down. I'm not gonna get the product that I want. This gang was responsible for 8 murders. 8 murders they were responsible for in I guess 5 or 6 year span. They sold enough drugs every year to make $14 million a year. It's incredible what they were able to do, and the havoc that they wreaked on Harlem and the residents of the surrounding areas. It was just incredible. If you didn't belong on that street, you were questioned by that gang. What are you doing on the street? If they didn't like the answer, you got a beating, or worse. There were only a handful of police officers that dared to go against this gang. It was, some of them were housing cops, myself included, and the 2-5 precinct. I later went down to ATF to join the Haida Task Force in 1991. So I was out of that loop of arresting them. But by 1993 or 94, I can't remember what year, the gang was finally taken down by the DEA and OCCB, which is Organized Crime Control Bureau of NYPD. They arrested the other gang, Obsession, because the Obsession crew actually had joined forces with the Purple Top gang and started selling on their street. But they switched the product that they were selling. They were no longer selling crack. They weren't allowed to sell crack. They sold heroin. And they were on one side and Purple Top was on the other side. The Obsession crew would sell from 6 in the morning to around 9, and then come back out from 3 to about 7 or 8 o'clock, and then they were done. They shut down for the day. These drugs that these people sold, it wasn't just, they weren't just aiming at the poverty people. It affected all races in all kinds of occupations. Judges, law enforcement, lawyers, doctors, construction workers, nurses. It affected everyone, just like it does now with drugs. You have to try to say no and teach your kids to say no to drugs because they are so dangerous. They can ruin a person's life and that family's life. It's undescribable how much damage drug abuse does. So if you have kids, you have to try to stay away from drugs and do other things. The problem is that people are always going to want to get high, which is going to always make people it's going to make people sell. And today's police officer, it's not like when I was a police officer. Their arrest powers and their powers to conduct investigations, I'm talking about uniformed cops and undercover cops and plainclothes cops. They can't conduct investigations like we were able to back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s. Because we were allowed to go on reasonable suspicion. If we saw a bulge in someone's pocket, we were allowed to put them against the wall and frisk them. They're no longer allowed to do that. They can't prevent a crime from happening. They have to wait for a crime to happen. Which in turn, that's why police officers get killed, and that's why the drugs run so rampant, and that's why there's so many weapons in not just New York, throughout the country. That's why the drugs is a problem throughout the country. They'll never win the war on drugs unless the police officers in the United States get their arrest powers back. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you did, hit the like and subscription button. Please stay safe with the coronavirus. Wear your gloves and your mask when you're going into a store. Keep the distance rule. I don't want to sound like your father, but it's just to keep you safe and other people around you. And until next time, please be safe. And I look forward to doing more episodes with you. Be safe, everybody.